Welcome to another episode of the Warriors Walk. Today we're going to be talking about the final mission, how Warriors finish well. And the idea behind this is that anyone can start strong, but what will be said at the end of your mission? This might be for people that are at a different season in life where they're finishing up one season and starting another one, or maybe you are later in your years and you want to finish your mission well on Earth. And so this episode is for you, so stay tuned.
Remember, like, he finished in a trailer park broke at 96. Like, he had no material possessions, but yet I'd like to think that he finished well.
You know, where Paul's like, I have the power to take your life, and Jesus is like, you don't have any power. Like, you only get power from the one that gives it to you. And when Jesus comes back, he's going to ask, did you make disciples? That was his lasting mandate.
He was never apologetic about it. My mom went to 20 high schools. That'll give you an idea of how many churches he built, pastored, and then found a young man and trained him up.
At the end of your career as a Navy SEAL, how did you know when it was time to finish the season?
It's like important is like, hey, we need to get behind cover because we're being shot at. Like, that gets my attention. But like mow the lawn, it's like way down here around my ankles. Like, yeah.
Now, Todd, you have retired from a career and you started to be a pastor. So you retired from the Navy SEALs. So you have a little bit of authority with ending a season well and starting another one. Some people that are watching or listening to this might be in a similar situation where maybe there's a job or a career that's coming to an end and they're about to transition. Maybe there's people that have been raising their children and they're about to be empty nesters. Maybe there's graduates that are about to finish high school or college or a master's degree. All this to say, finishing well is an important mission because it doesn't really matter how you start in a race. It really does matter how you finish or that you finish, right? I mean, so a lot of people just kind of fizzle off and don't even finish the race. And we want to make sure that we're equipping you guys on how to finish well. 2 Timothy 4:7, it says, I have fought the good fight. And he mentions how he's like at the end of his life, he was like, you know what? I've done well. I've finished the race. I've fought the good fight. And so tell us a little bit about different seasons of your life, maybe even specifically when you were at the end of your career as a Navy SEAL. How did you know when it was time to finish the season?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I, after multiple deployments and multiple ones to Afghanistan, that's kind of how I winded down. I got back before Thanksgiving 2012 and went on terminal leave December 1st. And so I was at the barn soaking wet as a horse. I knew... you never want to say this is my last deployment, not that I believe in jinx and things, but I just didn't want to say that. But I had a discussion with my wife before that deployment, and I was like, you know what? I've been able, God's been merciful, I've been able to lead from the front physically and do it, but as I'm approaching 50, this is getting hard, and this is definitely a young man's game. Certainly there's benefits to being older and wiser and doing things smarter, not harder, but the body can only do so much. And so I was everything was compounding, and I was like, all right, I think this is the last big push for me. And so I kind of knew the time was up for me personally. I also, I had my own personal things I was wrestling with. I was starting to view Afghanistan as a meat grinder, just seeing so many friends die there and many great U.S. service members, getting wounded and killed. And so I was just like, all right, I think I'm not in a good place to continue this. But I think what's important too is like when you finish something well, what's easier, at least for me, is being a SEAL wasn't my identity. And I think it's dangerous for a lot of us when whatever our profession is, no matter what it is, it could be a pastor, right? If that defines you, if that's why you think you exist, then you're in jeopardy of making some big mistakes, right? Because then you're going to actually start raising your position to, I think, an unhealthy place where it's almost an idol.
Yeah. And
so, like, I'm not a SEAL today. People are like, hey, no, I was a SEAL. Yeah. I was like, there's many things that I did when I was active duty I can't do today. And I'm way okay with saying that. Like, there's a shelf life. And so, yeah, is it a part of, my life? Yeah. And it was a great chapter. And my wife and I, we enjoyed our time in the military. She served alongside me, as far as being my bride and raising those kids, because I was gone a lot. But like, that isn't what defines me at the end of the day. It's who I am in Christ.
Yeah.
So that helps a lot, and that helped me transition well. And then God, of course, another time maybe I share on just exactly the transition out and how crystal clear he made it that it was time to go into ministry.
Yeah, that's good. Now, some people might not have the luxury of ending a season on their own terms. Where
Yes.
they like we pastor a lot of folks in the DMV area, so the DC metro area, and lately there's a lot of transitions happening in the federal government, and they're not always in control about when they're leaving or how they're leaving. And so, what encouragement would you give to someone that might be in a transition like that, where they're being laid off, or they're being cut, or they're what they've worked towards for so long, it's kind of coming to an end, even if that's not what they originally wanted?
Yeah, no, that's good. And that I would never want to take away from the sting of that too, because that can be really hard. I mean, the reality, especially for the providers, right? If you have a family to care for, that's stressful.
Yep.
There's no doubt that's stressful. And I think that's why it's so important to be in community. We've talked about that several times. Like, you don't want to be alone. And certainly it's a good time to reach out to your church for help too. Prayerfully, you have a church that's biblical where they come alongside you and try to care for you. And that does mean physical needs as well.
Yep.
Like, no church is going to let their members go hungry. I think where it gets tricky in this area specifically is the expense, right? This is one of the most expensive places to live in the nation. And so sometimes it may mean that you actually have to move because you can't afford to live here, right? But in the end, I think it's knowing, going back to what Jesus talked about with the sparrows, right? Like, one of them hits the ground, and like, God knows that. And how much more does he care about us?
Yeah.
And so I think you may have to recalibrate your new normal.
Yep.
Certainly my wife and I have had to do that several times in our life and in our marriage, where maybe your standard of living needs to change. So there's a lot of factors there. The kids that are in the private school and they have everything going for them, maybe you can't afford that anymore, as much as that's important. There's just so many things. I mean, we could probably do like a whole series on this, but I would not minimize the hurt or the anxiety, but I would say be brave enough to bring it before God, because he already knows you're anxious about it, and ask him to guide you through that time, and then to get with some solid believers to coach you through it too.
Yep. When I think about like even how Jesus faced a little bit of injustice. So, there was
A little?
Yeah. There was where Pilate's like, I have the power to take your life. And Jesus is like, you don't have any power. Like, you only get power from the one that gives it to you, and that's the Lord. And so when it comes to even transitions that might not be in our plan, just know that God is present in that, even if it doesn't seem like that was what your plan was, and to see how God can use even the most craziest of circumstances to benefit him. And maybe hindsight is always 2020 when we look back and we're like, that was actually the best thing for me at that moment, where it didn't seem like a fun experience at the time, but it was good to kind of look back and see how the Lord was orchestrating details that I didn't even know I needed yet. So.
Yeah. Well, I even think back, one of the highlights for my family was when I got instructor duty in Kodiak, Alaska. I literally got a phone call. I was souping a dive supervisor on a dive. I didn't even know we had a place in Kodiak, Alaska to train. I was an East Coast SEAL, so we trained in Goose Bay, Labrador, Norway, and places like that. They're like, hey, we hear you're a winter guy. You want to come up and do the training up in Kodiak, Alaska? And I'm like, what? And I was like a schoolboy. I called my wife. I'm like, hey. She's like, I need to at least see my parents before, because that was the catch too. I think it was mid-October, and I need to be there by 31 October. And she was like, what have you done? I was like, I said yes already, but are you excited? She's like, what have you done? Wow. But that ended up being a defining moment for our family. Like, that's where they consider home. Yeah. Like, they loved it up there.
Yeah. That's great.
We all did.
Yeah. And so sometimes, transitions like this, that even if we're not expecting them, the Lord is present in all the details and orchestration. And so with that too, what about some advice from the empty nesters point of view, where people might be losing their minds just thinking about, like, man, we don't have our kids around anymore. Like, what are we going to do? Like, there's some fear involved with them doing well, as they might leave the house or go off to school or the workplace or military. What are some tips or encouragement that you might give someone that it's in that stage to finish well?
So there's a myriad of responses here, but like, I'd almost back up for those of you who still have kids at home. One of the best things you can do is to make sure you're investing in your spouse. I'm a big fan of happy spouse, happy house, or vice versa. Happy house, happy spouse, right? Yeah. We all know the happy wife, happy life thing, but that's not biblical, right? Both should be working to help each other and invest in each other. And so it really starts there. Like, you want to invest in each other. Too many families, I think, they elevate their children to a point of almost an idol. And it's all about their kids, and they don't make time for each other. Then they wonder why they're strangers when the kids leave. So that's kind of the preventive thing. If you're still in that stage, make sure your kids know they're actually not number one.
Yep.
You know, that your relationship with the Lord is, and then your spouse, and then the kids. So I think that's healthy. But if the kids are already gone, I think it's a time where if it's invested well, your marriage can get stronger. You know, if you haven't started praying with your wife on a regular basis, it's a great time to do it. I've seen many people that I've coached and said, hey, you know, have you ever thought about just like at least closing out your day and praying with your spouse? And it's been a game changer for all of them. And there's recent surveys that I've read that the divorce rate for spouses that pray together every day is like 1.5%. So like over 98% of marriages that pray daily together, they stay married. That's like a simple thing to do.
Yeah.
And yet many people in the church don't do it. And so that's definitely one thing. And then I would think it's time to push each other like, hey, you're not done. You're definitely not done being a parent. I've learned that. You know, you're still a parent after they leave, which I didn't, you know, I panicked when our first one left. I was like, oh, he doesn't know everything. And they never will. Neither did we. And we still don't.
Yeah.
But it's a sweet season where it's like maybe you have a little more bandwidth. Like, okay, you know, I was always playing, you know, taxi and driving them to the baseball game or whatever. But now it's like, I can go tinker with those motorcycles, or I can learn to play the guitar. Like, you know, it's been sitting in my garage for 20 years. So I think it can be, you know, like any season in shift, like, you know, embrace it and enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you know, we have in some of the notes here to really focus on faithfulness over flashiness, to really explore that daily faithfulness, the hidden obedience, and importance of just consistency over time. But you have a personal experience with your grandfather, how he finished his race well.
Yeah. So one of my grandfathers was a pastor, and he was a bivocational pastor, in which, if you're not familiar with that term, that means you're pastoring churches that are so small that you have to have another job. So you're your own tent maker, like Paul. And he was a handyman. He did phenomenal things. He was very gifted. But what was neat is God blessed him with tremendous health, and he pastored up until like 90.
Wow.
And and the reason he stopped pastoring was he started having some heart issues, and he wasn't allowed to button his top button and wear a tie anymore. And he was like, well, then I can't fill the pulpit. Like, he was old school. So if he couldn't wear a suit jacket with a tie, then he's like, you're not. So he would cringe to see you and I today and what we preach in. But I just love the fact that he never pastored a church bigger than 200, and he was never apologetic about it. My mom went to 20 high schools. That'll give you an idea of how many churches he built, pastored, and then found a young man and trained him up. So he was very goal-oriented, maybe to the point where it definitely upset his kids. But, you know, he started in the swamps of Louisiana. He built that church, the Little Brown Church. It's a historical place now, but he built it on stilts there. Didn't see any Cajuns for a year. Baptized 50 of them, and he had 50 solid believers that were Cajuns there, even learned how to speak Creole and minister to them. And he said, I learned more in the swamps than I ever did in seminary, boy. And he was a great outdoorsman. He learned how to live off the land, of course, made his own medicine from plants. But I remember, like, he finished in a trailer park, broke at 96. Like, he had no material possessions, but yet I'd like to think that he finished well. Like, he was given a course to run, and he spent it all for the glory of God. Everything. Like, if he had something and someone needed it, he'd give it to him.
Yeah.
He'd figure out how to get a car later. You need a car? Here, take mine.
Wow.
I guess I'll just walk.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of guy he was.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, and I think even just having that idea of the legacy of faith, and this question that we put in here is so crucial. You know, what will your spiritual after action report say? So tell us a little bit of background about an after action report.
Yeah, after action or lesson learned come in many shapes and forms, but in our community, in the SEAL teams, it's actually pretty brutal. You know, and maybe it's morphed into something better today, but normally, like, we eat our own, and so you get back, and if it's an hour debrief, which that's almost an oxymoron, debrief, but you're just going over all the mistakes you made and stuff like that. But when I was in charge of Kodiak, I think I developed a new plan where we're going to share 3 things that went right and 3 things that went wrong. And we always dealt with the wrong things first. And then we cataloged them. So we had a huge lessons learned book up there in Kodiak for the students. And I did the same thing for my platoons. when I was chief of platoons, and it became a valuable resource. So let's say pick one block of training like MAROPS, where you're dealing with boats in the ocean and all the things that go with that. Well, when you would do that block of training again, you would revisit those lessons learned, like, oh yeah, we got to make sure, we have this fuel bladder and make sure the hose is plugged in the right way or it's not going to work. I mean, whatever those simple lessons were, they're not always simple if you're a new guy. And so you build upon that knowledge and then you disseminate it. And prayerfully, over time, you actually get better as a group. And then you carry that information into your next platoon and your next platoon. And that's why, having the older guys around is money, right? Because they've learned a lot of lessons learned.
Yep.
And, in the SEAL teams and a lot of communities, we always say lessons learned are in blood, right? So when they say, hey, make sure you don't ride on the back of plywood in the state truck, even if it's just in the compound, it's because we lost 2 guys in Puerto Rico. Wind blew these 2 guys out, and they landed on their heads, broke their necks, and they died.
Wow.
Going 10 miles an hour. So all those things, it seems like, you're being told no, like they're trying to squash your dreams of surfing on plywood is because people died doing it. Stuff like that. So
yeah, that's huge. Well, and even just asking that question, whatever season you're in, how are you investing in others, and how are you investing spiritually in others? We've talked about this, till we're blue in the face, but the importance of discipling other people. When Jesus comes back, he's going to ask, did you make disciples? That was his lasting mandate. And just like, I've used this analogy before, and I think it's so helpful for me. It's like, if I told my son, say Hudson, my oldest, I said, hey, I'm going to go to the store. By the time I get back, I want you to make your bed. And when I get back, what's the first thing I'm going to ask him? It's like, did you make your bed? and he's like, well, I helped with the laundry. It's like, well, that's good, but did you make your bed? And the same thing, it's like Jesus, when he left, he's like, make disciples. I'm going to come back one day. And when he comes back, guess what he's going to ask us?
What if you wrote a book about it?
Yeah. What if you had a great radio station? What if you had a big church building? It's
or
like,
a podcast.
Yeah. What if you had a great podcast? And all this different stuff. But at the end of the day, like we want to make disciples. We want to invest in the lives of others that'll last for eternity. And I think whatever season you find yourself in, that's the key takeaway from today, is that we want you to know that it's possible to finish well, to end well, to honor all people, whatever season you're in, and to invest in the spiritual lives of other people. I think that's the main application from today's podcast. So share with us a SEAL survival tip when you're talking about training for the mission, not the moment.
Yeah, what I put down here is, you don't just train for one firefight, one engagement. Like, you train for the whole deployment. So we always called it, like, when you're a deployable asset, it was called C1 at the time. It may be called something else today, but that's when you've checked all the boxes. You're good to deploy. You've proven you can do all the things they expect you to do overseas. But you're living something beyond that too. Like, you also need to train on even how you come home well. And I think that's something that was lacking for a long time. And I know they have things in place to help guys come home better now, to know how to re-engage with their families. If they've had a hard deployment, seen a lot of combat, a lot of hard things, because we weren't doing well for a season there. And, in marriages, in any special warfare, whether it doesn't matter what service, the divorce rate is really high. And a lot of it is because the guys they're not trained on that. Like, we're trained to compartmentalize all things, and that manifests in our relationships that mean the most to us. I joke, that we were so good at it. Like, you come home and your wife's like, hey, could you mow the lawn? Okay, yeah, I'll get to it. And then like a year later, she screams at you, I said mow the lawn. The kids are missing. You're like, well, why didn't you say so? Because it didn't reach that threshold of important to you, right? Because like, important is like, hey, we need to get behind cover because we're being shot at. Like, that gets my attention. But like, mow the lawn, it's like way down here around my ankles. Like, yeah. And so I remember we listened to a podcast, my wife and I. There's a guy that was, I think he was a psychiatrist that was over all the 75th Ranger guys. But regardless of who he's covering, it covered any group that was really near the danger zones. And he was talking about this compartmentalization, and it helped my wife so much. And I'd like to say I did a decent job of, kind of decompressing and getting back to normal, but it helped her understand, like, if she really needed something done, like, she needed to convey it differently to me. Because if it didn't reach that threshold, I was like, yes, I hear you, but like, I'm not taking action because it's not important. I got so many other things that I think are more important right now. So I think that's a big part of it. And then, what I wanted to share in closing too, just, there's so many things going on locally around here and around the nation right now, as far as an actual survival tip that I think is important. There's two things. One, if you have small children, whether you're a grandparent, whether you're a parent, there are more and more audacious people today that are trying to take kids. Like the other day we were watching, and a guy in a Walmart store went up, woman was holding her child, and he tried to take the baby from her. It's like a 2-year-old, just rip her out of her arms. And she, kicked and screamed and everything. And then he casually went to the next aisle and just shopped. And thankfully they had him on camera and they caught him, before he left the store. But we had someone in Ashburn a couple months ago tried to lift a kid out of the high chair in like a regular restaurant. Just pick him up and snatch and grab. And of course, family dove on him. But in that split second, if you go fill up your soda and your kid's in the high chair, there are people watching. And so today, more than ever, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but like we need to pay attention to our surroundings. Yeah. And ultimately that goes to, like just parking lot safety. Again, not just with your kids, but just being aware of your surroundings. Yeah. Same thing. Like I know I've wore your wife out with the whole keep your gas tank at least a half full, because there may be a day where you need gas. And if you pull in and it looks sketchy, if it's half full, you don't have to get it there. Yeah. Even I practice that. Like I may be prepared if there's a bad guy there, but I'm like, if it just feels wrong, I'm like, why bother? Like I'll go find another gas station.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of it. But I think we've reached the point where we're going to take a pause with the Warriors Walk for the summer. And we want to make sure we're not going anywhere. We're just taking a break. And we also are super grateful for how you guys have been watching, staying tuned, and just sharing the comments and sharing the actual podcast. Because as you know, if you've been listening to us for these 72 episodes, when you share, when you like, you help further this message. And let me take you all the way back to the very first episode that Keith and I shared with you. And that is our heart behind this is to equip Christians in their daily walk with God. That's it. And so along the way, certainly we're sharing some fun stories and we're sharing some SEAL tips that I've learned through personal life. But ultimately, we want to equip every man and woman to be a follower of Christ, to live a biblical life that's honoring and pleasing to God. And so we'd appreciate your prayers as we take a little downtime this summer to invest in our families because we want to practice what we preach, but we look forward to coming back. And we also want to encourage you to drop some comments and say, you know what? We've listened to all 72 episodes, but we sure would like to hear about this. Let us know what that is, and we'll do our best to work on those topics. So when we come back, we will be ready to cover exactly what you need to get out there on the battlefield. So until then, stay tuned.